Before espresso bars lined every street corner, before cappuccinos came with foam art and takeaway cups, Italian mornings were quieter. Breakfast didn't happen standing at a counter or rushing out the door. It happened at home, often alone, often before the rest of the house stirred. This is the breakfast my Italian grandmother woke up to every morning. Not a menu, not a trend, just a simple ritual, repeated day after day, long before cafes became part of daily life. The morning began before the sun. My grandmother woke before anyone else in the house, not because she needed to, but because she always had. Her body knew the hour without a clock. Outside, the sky hovered between night and morning, pale and uncertain, and the house held a kind of quiet that only exists before work, school, and voices begin to fill the rooms. She never rushed. There was no need. Mornings weren't something to overcome or get through. They were meant to be entered gently. The day began slowly, on purpose. The kitchen was cold, especially in winter. Stone floors clung to the night's chill, and the air carried familiar smells. Wood, old cupboards, and bread from the day before. She tied on her apron out of habit more than necessity, lit the stove, and let warmth return little by little. Breakfast was never elaborate. It wasn't meant to impress or distract. It was meant to wake you softly, to settle you, and to prepare you for the hours ahead without asking too much. Bread was always the center. Everything began with bread, not fresh bread, that was saved for later in the day, but yesterday's loaf, resting quietly in a cloth on the counter. In rural Italy, bread wasn't something you picked up on a whim. It was baked once or twice a week, often in communal ovens, and treated with care. You learned early that bread was not to be wasted, rushed, or taken lightly. The loaf was dense and sturdy, with a thick crust that held its shape. My grandmother sliced it generously, never thin. Thin slices were for celebrations or guests. Morning bread needed substance. It needed to satisfy and carry you through the early hours. Sometimes she toasted it directly over the open flame, gripping it carefully with metal tongs, turning it slowly until the edges darkened just enough. Other mornings, she warmed it gently in a pan, coaxing life back into it without drying it out. As it heated, the kitchen filled with a dry, earthy aroma, familiar, grounding, unmistakable. That smell alone signaled the start of the day. Coffee before cafes. There was always coffee, but it wasn't the kind we think of today. No espresso machine, no foam, no urgency. Just a small aluminum mocha pot, darkened from years of use, resting on the stove as naturally as the kettle. She filled it by instinct, water to the valve. Coffee settled gently into the filter, never pressed down. Once it was on the flame, she let it be. Coffee took the time it needed. She didn't hover or check the clock. The soft bubbling sound told her when it was ready, long before steam ever did. This wasn't coffee meant to jolt you awake or hurry the morning along. It was meant to keep you company while you thought. She poured it into a small cup, added nothing, and sat down. No newspaper yet, no radio, just coffee, bread, and a quiet moment before the day began. Olive oil for the morning. Many mornings, the bread was eaten with olive oil, not drizzled carefully, but poured without hesitation. She set the slice on a plate and spooned the oil generously over the surface, letting it sink into every crack and hollow. Sometimes she added a small pinch of salt. Other days, nothing else was needed. This wasn't considered plain or lacking. It was simply normal. Olive oil was treated as food, not a finishing touch. It came from trees she recognized, harvested by people she knew, pressed close enough that it still felt personal. As the oil soaked in, the bread softened, turning rich and deeply satisfying. One thick slice was usually enough. She ate slowly, tearing pieces with her hands instead of cutting them neatly. Breakfast wasn't about formality or presentation. It was about comfort, familiarity, and starting the day without effort or tension. Sugar was rare, jam was precious. Sweet breakfasts existed, but they were always simple and restrained. If there was jam, it was homemade, fig, grape, or plum, depending on the season and what had grown nearby. The jars were opened carefully and expected to last. Nothing was wasted, especially something sweet. She spread the jam thinly, just enough to flavor the bread without covering it. Sugar was never something you piled on. It was something you respected, something meant to be enjoyed in small amounts. Some mornings, the bread was dipped directly into coffee. It's the kind of habit that might seem strange now, but back then it felt completely natural. The coffee softened the crust, turning it tender and almost cake-like for a moment. It wasn't messy or indulgent, it was familiar. The kind of small ritual you never questioned because it had always been there. Milk and coffee, never together. Café a latte existed, but it was never indulgent. The milk was warmed slowly and gently, never allowed to boil. Coffee was added with care, just enough to tint the milk and give it warmth without overpowering it. This version was reserved for colder mornings, or for days when the stomach felt unsettled and needed something softer. Milk, however, was strictly a morning thing. Never in the afternoon, never after a meal. She believed milk belonged to the early hours and had no place later in the day. Rules like this were never written down or explained out loud. They weren't debated or questioned. They were simply understood, passed along through habit rather than instruction, followed without needing a reason. Breakfast was often eaten alone. This surprises people now, but breakfast was never a family event. My grandfather was often already outside, tending to animals or working the land. The children slept longer, and the house would fill with movement and noise later in the morning. Breakfast belonged to her. It was her moment alone. She sat at the small kitchen table with her back straight and her hands resting calmly in front of her. Sometimes she looked out the window. Sometimes she thought about the work ahead. Other mornings, she thought about nothing at all. There was no rush to fill the silence. No one interrupted. No one needed anything yet. That quiet, brief, and protected mattered more than the food itself. Leftovers were morning food. Nothing was ever wasted, and that rule applied just as much to breakfast as it did to any other meal. If there was leftover polenta from the day before, it was sliced carefully and warmed in a pan until the edges softened and the center heated through. It didn't need embellishment. The flavor was already there, familiar and steady. She ate it slowly, often with coffee, treating it no differently than bread. Sometimes there was a piece of cake left from the previous day. Never frosted, never decorated, just a simple bake made with fruit, oil, or a bit of sugar. It wasn't considered dessert food, it was food, and if it was there, it could belong to the morning just as easily as the afternoon. She believed sweetness had its place, but only when it stayed quiet. Savory leftovers weren't common at breakfast, but they weren't forbidden either. If hunger called for something more substantial, time of day didn't stand in the way. Food was food. Labels mattered less than nourishment. What guided her choices was balance. Nothing too heavy that would slow you down. Nothing too sweet that would demand attention. Breakfast was meant to support the day ahead, not steal energy from it. It wasn't about variety or indulgence. It was about using what you had, respecting it, and starting the day feeling steady rather than full. Eggs were occasional, never daily. Eggs existed, but they were never everyday food. When they appeared at breakfast, it felt deliberate rather than routine. They were cooked simply, without additions or decoration. Sometimes they were fried gently in olive oil, the whites set just enough while the yolks stayed soft. Other times, they were scrambled slowly, stirred carefully until just tender, with nothing added beyond a pinch of salt. Eggs were often shared, not served as a full plate to one person. They were meant to supplement the meal, not dominate it. There was an understanding that eggs carried weight. They were filling, grounding, and meant to be eaten with intention. Breakfast wasn't meant to leave you heavy or sluggish. It was meant to prepare you for the work ahead, not replace the need for movement and effort. Food existed to support the day, not to become the focus of it. Eggs fit into that balance perfectly, appearing only when they were needed and appreciated rather than expected. Bread was sometimes rubbed with tomato. In the warmer months, tomato made its way to the breakfast table. A ripe one was cut in half and rubbed directly onto toasted bread, its flesh staining the surface red and releasing its sharp, fresh scent. A drizzle of olive oil followed, then a small pinch of salt. Nothing else was needed. It was breakfast that tasted like summer, bright, clean, and alive. The flavors were simple but complete, shaped entirely by the quality of the ingredients. There was no recipe to follow and nothing to measure. You knew it was right by taste alone. It left almost no trace behind. No pans, no bowls, no effort to clean up afterward. Just bread, tomato, and a quiet moment at the table before the day grew louder. The absence of choice was the point. There were no decisions to make in the morning, no menus to scan, no options to weigh, no substitutions to consider. Breakfast was what it was, and that certainty was a kind of comfort. My grandmother never stood in the kitchen wondering what she felt like eating. She didn't ask herself what sounded good or what she was in the mood for. She ate what the morning provided, what was already there, what had always been there. That absence of choice made mornings gentler. There was no negotiation with the day yet, no small decisions draining energy before work even began. The rhythm was set long before she woke up, shaped by habit, season, and necessity. Bread, coffee, maybe oil or jam. The details shifted, but the structure never did. In a life filled with labor and responsibility, this was one small place where nothing was demanded of her. She didn't need to plan or anticipate. She simply followed a pattern that had proven itself over decades. The body knew what to expect, and the mind could stay quiet a little longer. Modern mornings ask us to decide too much, too early. But in her kitchen, breakfast removed choice instead of offering it. That simplicity was not limiting. It was freeing. It allowed the day to begin without pressure, grounded in repetition and familiarity, easing her into whatever came next. Bread meant memory. She often said bread carried memory, not in a poetic way meant to impress, but as a simple fact. The way it was baked, sliced, and eaten held reminders of where you came from and who had fed you before. Even when ingredients were few, meaning was not. A loaf told you about the land, the oven, the hands that kneaded it, and the rhythm of the days that shaped it. Bread was repetition made edible. The same flour, the same method, the same gestures passed down without being written. Each morning, breaking into yesterday's loaf reinforced a sense of continuity. Yesterday flowed naturally into today without disruption or drama. There was comfort in that predictability, a quiet reassurance that life was holding its shape. In her world, change was slow and stability was valued. New things arrived gradually, often with suspicion, and only stayed if they proved useful. Bread did not change because it didn't need to. It had already earned its place. Eating it in the morning was not about variety or novelty, but about grounding yourself before the day asked anything of you. Those breakfasts weren't about nostalgia at the time. They were about survival, habit, and belonging. Only later did they reveal themselves as memory made physical, something you could hold, tear, and eat, carrying the past forward in the most ordinary way possible. No rush, even when there was work. Even on the busiest days, breakfast was never rushed. If more needed to be done, she simply woke earlier. That was the adjustment. Speed itself was considered careless, a sign that something had already gone wrong. You didn't rush food, and you didn't rush waking. You changed the clock, not the ritual. Mornings were treated as a foundation. If the beginning was hurried or chaotic, the rest of the day would carry that tension forward. She believed calm had to be established before effort could follow. Sitting down to eat, even briefly, was part of that preparation. It wasn't indulgent or leisurely. It was necessary. Food demanded attention, even in its simplest form. Bread still needed to be sliced properly. Coffee still needed time to brew. Skipping steps or eating while standing felt disrespectful, not just to the food, but to yourself. Breakfast marked the transition from sleep to responsibility, and that transition mattered. This way of thinking extended beyond the kitchen. Work was steady, not frantic. Tasks were approached methodically. You did one thing fully before moving on to the next. Rushing suggested impatience, and impatience led to mistakes. In a life shaped by seasons rather than schedules, time was flexible in the early hours. She owned the morning by waking before it demanded anything from her. That quiet control made everything else feel manageable. By honoring the ritual, even on demanding days, she set the tone. The day would unfold at its own pace, not push her into haste. Cafes changed the rhythm. When cafes became common, breakfast began to change. People stopped sitting and started standing. Cups grew smaller, conversations shortened. Coffee became something swallowed quickly at a counter, squeezed between obligations. Morning was no longer a threshold. It became something to get through as fast as possible. My grandmother noticed the shift, but she didn't follow it. At home, breakfast stayed exactly the same. The same bread, the same coffee, the same chair at the same small table. She never replaced it with standing in line or drinking coffee outside. Home breakfast wasn't old-fashioned to her. It wasn't a habit waiting to be upgraded. It was a constant. She didn't see cafes as wrong, just unnecessary for the first meal of the day. Breakfast, in her mind, belonged to the home. It belonged to quiet, familiarity, and repetition. Leaving the house before eating felt unbalanced, like skipping a step. No matter how busy the world became, that belief didn't change. Even when others adopted quicker routines, she kept hers intact. Sitting down mattered. Using the same cup mattered. Eating in the same place each morning mattered. These small consistencies anchored her in a world that was moving faster than she ever asked it to. Home breakfast wasn't about nostalgia or resistance. It was about continuity. It reminded her who she was before the noise of the day began. Trends could come and go. Cafes could multiply. But the morning table remained hers, steady, unaltered, and waiting. Breakfast as grounding. Looking back, the food itself almost feels secondary. What mattered more was what it did to her, how it settled her before the day asked anything of her. Breakfast was less about nourishment in the strict sense and more about grounding. It aligned the body and mind quietly, without effort or excess. Bread anchored the body. It was solid, familiar, and dependable. Each bite reminded her where she was, what sustained her, and what didn't need changing. Coffee focused the mind, not by jolting it awake, but by sharpening it gently. The warmth of the cup, the bitterness, the slow sipping, all of it created clarity rather than urgency. And the quiet steadied the spirit. Silence wasn't empty in those mornings. It was supportive. It gave her space to arrive fully in herself before the world arrived in her. By the time the rest of the house woke, she was already centered. She had eaten. She had thought. She had sat with herself long enough to feel ready. The noise, the requests, the movement, none of it felt abrupt because she had prepared for it in stillness. That kind of morning did something subtle but lasting. It meant the day didn't start scattered. It started from a place of balance. And once you begin the day that way, everything else feels more manageable no matter what comes next. What we lost with convenience. Modern breakfasts are faster, flashier, louder, designed to impress or keep pace with the day. They promise convenience, speed, novelty, but they rarely feel complete. Something essential is missing. What my grandmother's breakfast offered wasn't efficiency. It was orientation. It rooted her in the morning, in the house, in herself. Each bite of bread, each slow sip of coffee, Each moment of quiet told her where she was, who she was, and what kind of day she was entering. It marked a transition, but one that happened gently, deliberately, without forcing urgency. All of this happened before cafes existed, before takeout, before the rush became normal. There were no machines, no menus, no screens, just the rhythm of simple food and a mind allowed to wake fully. It was complete in a way that modern breakfasts rarely are, subtle, grounding, and deeply human. My grandmother never called this tradition. She never romanticized it. She simply lived it. Bread, coffee, quiet, repeated every morning, unchanged, dependable. In a world that now wakes up scrolling and rushing, her breakfast feels almost radical in its simplicity. Not because it was old-fashioned, but because it worked.